Hey everyone, welcome back, and thanks for joining me today. There's something major happening right now that could mark a turning point in the ongoing fight over gun control laws in the United States, specifically those so-called handgun rosters that exist in certain states. These rosters, which are essentially government-approved lists of handguns allowed for sale, have long been a tool for regulating and restricting what law-abiding citizens are allowed to purchase. But that may be coming to an end, and not just in one state, but nationwide. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with how these handgun rosters work, here's a quick overview. In states like California, Massachusetts, and New York, government agencies maintain official lists of approved handguns. If a firearm doesn't appear on the list, it's illegal to sell it in that state, regardless of whether it's widely available, commonly used, or proven safe in other parts of the country. And it's not about the firearm functioning poorly or posing a unique danger. More often, it's because the gun doesn't include certain mandated features, many of which are either technically unproven or unrealistic for manufacturers to implement at scale. Some of the most common requirements that prevent firearms from making it onto these rosters include things like loaded chamber indicators, magazine disconnects, and microstamping. These sound technical, and they are. But here's the thing. They're often unnecessary, impractical, and in the case of microstamping, not even commercially viable. Microstamping, for example, involves etching a unique identifier on each bullet casing fired, so that law enforcement could theoretically trace a casing back to the firearm. But the technology doesn't exist in a consistent or scalable form. It's fragile, can wear off, and can be easily tampered with. Yet some states still require it. What ends up happening is that manufacturers either have to redesign specific models just to comply with one state's regulation or choose not to sell their firearms in that state at all. Most choose the latter. This means that residents in roster states are stuck with fewer options, often outdated models that haven't been updated in years. In fact, some guns on California's roster haven't changed since the early 2000s, while their newer, safer versions are banned simply because they lack a microstamping feature that doesn't exist in practice. It's more than just a technicality, it's a deliberate method of control. By wrapping these restrictions in the language of safety, certain state governments have essentially created backdoor bans on new firearms. They're not banning guns outright, they're just making it incredibly difficult for anyone to access modern models, regardless of how safe or widely accepted those models are elsewhere. And that's where this issue starts to clash head-on with constitutional rights. The Second Amendment guarantees the right of the people to keep and bear arms. But when a state says, you can only own this list of government-approved guns, it raises serious legal questions. Courts across the country have been increasingly scrutinizing these types of regulations. And following the Supreme Court's ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, which emphasized a historical tradition test for Second Amendment restrictions. More courts are finding modern gun laws like rosters to be constitutionally questionable. What's especially frustrating is that these restrictions often end up penalizing the people who follow the law. Responsible gun owners, while doing nothing meaningful to reduce crime or improve safety, criminals don't follow roster rules, they don't consult approved lists. They get their weapons outside legal channels. So all these laws really do is limit what law-abiding citizens can access while giving the illusion of safety. The real-world impact of rosters is tangible. Think about someone in California wanting to buy a modern, reliable, and safe handgun for home defense. That person will find that dozens, if not hundreds, of common models sold freely in most of the U.S. are unavailable to them. Instead, they're left with older designs, often with fewer safety features or ergonomic improvements. And all because those newer models don't have features that only a handful of states care about. For decades, these rosters have stood as barriers, legal walls that isolate some Americans from their full constitutional rights. And despite growing opposition and legal pressure, they've managed to stay in place, largely because federal action has been slow or non-existent. But that may finally be changing. Before we go deeper, if you believe that these kinds of restrictions have gone too far and that it's time for a national change, now's a great time to hit that like button. It really helps this message reach more people. And if you want to stay informed on the latest developments, especially as this moves through Congress, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss anything. But amidst all the frustration and legal confusion, a new effort is quietly gaining momentum, one that could shift the entire conversation on firearm access and challenge the very foundation of these rosters. A new bill has been introduced in Congress that directly targets this system of restrictions. It's called the Modern Firearms Safety Act, and while its title might sound tame, its implications are anything but. This bill, if passed, could render all existing handgun rosters across the country null and void, and more importantly, prevent new ones from being created. The bill takes a direct aim at state-level regulations that require specific technological features on handguns before they are allowed to be sold. As we mentioned earlier, these features include microstamping, loaded chamber indicators, and magazine disconnect mechanisms. These aren't safety standards supported by universal evidence. They're arbitrary hurdles that have served more to obstruct the legal market than protect the public. The Modern Firearms Safety Act seeks to prohibit states from mandating these specific design requirements that have no basis in federal law and no widespread industry adoption. It frames these mandates as what they truly are: a form of indirect firearm prohibition through bureaucratic means. The bill recognizes that adding a feature like microstamping isn't simply a matter of tweaking a design. It's asking manufacturers to invest in unproven, unreliable technology, essentially to redesign products to meet standards that only exist in a few states and don't hold up to scientific scrutiny. It also considers the ripple effect of these mandates. By pushing manufacturers out of state markets, these laws shrink lawful access to newer, safer, and more efficient firearm models. Ironically, they often force residents to settle for outdated versions that don't benefit from recent advancements in materials, ergonomics, and manufacturing precision. So, rather than making gun ownership safer, the net effect is that people are stuck with older equipment simply because it meets an arbitrary checklist. What makes this legislative push particularly timely is the looming deadline in California. Back in 2023, California passed a law that will fully enforce microstamping requirements starting in 2028. This means that in just a few short years, no handgun will be allowed on California's roster unless it's equipped with functioning microstamping technology. Technology that, as of 2025, still does not exist in any practical, large-scale form. Manufacturers have made it clear, if this law goes into effect as written, they won't be able to comply. That means Californians could see their already limited handgun market all but vanish. There won't be grandfathered models. There won't be exceptions. If a handgun doesn't meet the microstamping mandate, it's out. This law is set to create one of the most sweeping handgun bans in U.S. history, not through direct prohibition, but through impossible standards. And unless something changes at the federal level, this model could be replicated in other states, further fragmenting the country's approach to gun ownership and deepening inequality between states. The Modern Firearms Safety Act addresses this head-on. By setting national standards for what constitutes a lawful handgun, it prevents states from weaponizing regulatory requirements in a way that undermines the Second Amendment. This doesn't mean eliminating safety. It means making safety consistent, practical, and rooted in evidence rather than politics. Supporters of the bill argue that this is not about stripping states of all authority, but rather restoring balance and preventing overreach. Just as states can't ban books by requiring impossible-to-meet paper standards, they shouldn't be able to ban handguns by mandating impossible-to-meet technology. And while lawsuits against roster laws are already underway in multiple states, legal challenges can take years to wind their way through the court system. A legislative solution could provide faster relief and clearer rules for both citizens and manufacturers. Of course, for this bill to become law, it needs broad public awareness and support. Legislative action depends heavily on pressure from constituents who care enough to reach out, speak up, and vote. Too often, good bills get stuck in committee or stall in the middle of a session simply because not enough people paid attention at the right time. That's where this community makes a real difference. If you're still watching, it means you care. It means you understand how critical this moment is, not just for people in California or New York, but for everyone who believes that constitutional rights shouldn't be determined by a zip code. We're approaching 2026, and the window for action is closing fast. The time to make noise is now, not after the consequences hit. So here's what you can do. Share this video with friends, especially those who live in roster states. Leave a comment below. What do you think about these rosters? Have they affected your ability to own or upgrade a firearm? Your stories are important, and they help others realize this isn't just a legal battle. It's a real-world issue with real consequences. And if you haven't already, hit the like button so more people see this. Subscribe if you want to stay informed as this bill moves forward, and ring the bell so you're the first to know when there's an update. This isn't the end of the conversation, but it could be the beginning of the end for a deeply flawed system that has stood in the way of millions of Americans exercising a fundamental right. The fight for fairness, consistency, and freedom in firearm ownership is gaining ground, and with enough awareness and effort, we just might see that fight finally pay off. Thanks for being part of it.